Set sail on the high seas because it's the latest animated adventure from Netflix and the director of that one John Travolta dog movie. The Sea Beast is the charming new film about a young girl, a famed monster hunter, and a giant red kaiju. I guess in the end, the real Sea Beast is entrenched royalty. I'm Chris Goodmakers, and I'm here to discuss the new Netflix feature and break down some hidden details, real-life inspirations, and fun references. Spoilers ahead for the Sea Beast, and I guess also Jaws.
Smile, you son of a...
The Sea Beast takes place in an alternate world where the oceans are filled with various aquatic beasties that aren't too shy about pulling a few sailing ships to a watery grave. The main focus is the notorious red bluster, who is certainly an apex predator. However, the film features several other creatures with real-world inspirations. At the start of the film, Captain Crow uses his ship, the Inevitable, to rescue fellow hunters from the giant Brickleback. The giant sea monster has a lot of basis in historical myth. The idea of a tentacled monster violently attacking a ship goes back centuries. The Kraken is a myth that stretched all the way back to ancient Greece, but Jules Verne popularized the idea with a giant squid. Pirates of the Caribbean also gave us similar imagery when the Kraken attacks Jack Sparrow and his beloved Black Pearl. That's not the only pirates imagery in the Sea Beast, but that's its whole own section later. Stay tuned. One of the two main characters in the Sea Beast is Jacob Holland. The movie opens on a very young Jacob floating alone in the ocean. This is the genesis of his monster hunting, and since then, it looks like he has developed some impeccable skill. The first action sequence of the film features several small moments that inform Jacob's character and his skill set. He is highly experienced at sailing, and it shows in almost every moment he's on screen. He's already ahead of Captain Crow, knowing to draw the Brickleback upwind so that the ship has more maneuverability. Crossing the T, as Crow mentions, is a plan to drive ahead, swoop around, and face their guns at the monster. In the run-up, Jacob is coordinating his team and preparing for the fight. Once it kicks off, he has several remarkable moments of quick thinking. Among those are the way he tucks into the water at the last second, and how he knows every rope and plank of his ship. The Inevitable is a large part of the main setting for the Sea Beast, and every detail of the ship informs the world as well. At the bow of the monster hunting vessel, there's a large ornate masthead. While decorative, it's also practical as the large spikes and grooves make it harder for a tentacle to wrap around. The ship also has these side walkways. The crew uses them to walk up and down the side of the ship, but also to spear the beast as it approaches from the water below. There are also several specialized pieces of equipment. These include the large pole that's dropped out on the side so Jacob can harpoon the Brickleback. The Inevitable also sits fairly low in the water. Captain Crow points out later how the Imperator is too high. It would be easier to capsize a larger ship. Not the Inevitable though. The Inevitable also has very bright red sails. It is a distinctive feature of what is basically the Hunters Guild's flagship. The sails are because the Inevitable was actually built from the ground up to hunt the red bluster. Captain Crow talks about how the beast took his deadlight. It's more sailor slang for his left eye. Various bits of dialogue throughout the film also hint at this first encounter. Crow talks about how he has hunted the beast for a long time since that day and crafted this ship around that singular purpose. It's even where it gets the name, because Crow hopes that catching the bluster is inevitable. Or he's just a big Thanos fan.
Inevitable.
Speaking of the ship and its monster hunting crew, there's a lot of inspiration drawn from another story about a man and a large ocean dweller. Jaws is the classic Steven Spielberg film that literally invented the concept of summer blockbusters. Its influence is felt to this day, and the Sea Beast is no exception. Both the crews of the Inevitable and the Orca use the same techniques. The side rails I pointed out earlier are also on the Orca. In Jaws, Brody, Hooper, and Quint use them to navigate up and down the ship and shoot at the monstrous shark in the same way as Jacob. They also use a similar barrel system. In Jaws, the crew of the Orca use large, air-filled barrels to track the location of the shark. They fire harpoons into the great white and attach them to the barrels that then float on the surface of the water. The Inevitable does the same thing with these large round balloons. It's a good reversal when they realize the rope has been cut and the buoy no longer tells them where the Brickleback is. I guess the shark wasn't as smart. Jaws isn't the only tale of a big ocean dweller and the men that hunt it that's referenced in this movie. Moby Dick is just as influential as Jaws in the world of classical literature. The book was first published in 1851 and has been adapted countless times in countless ways. It's the tale of a young man who joins a whaling ship led by the intimidating Captain Ahab. He's a man who is disabled by an encounter with a large white sea creature that he now obsessively hunts. Spoiler alert for a novel that's well over 100 years old, but the whale wins. Of course, the obvious parallels Captain Crow and Ahab. Crow is disabled by the red bluster just like Ahab was by the white whale. For Ahab it was his leg, but for Crow it was his eye. The peg leg still appears, but now attached to first mate Sarah Sharp. She holds much less of a grudge, however, helping free Red at the film's end. There's also parallels to the protagonist of both works. Both Ismahl and Maisie find themselves as fresh recruits on a ship full of harpooners and experienced sailors. They both develop strong relationships with the crew while still maintaining an open mind about the creature they hunt. Maisie develops a strong connection to Red while Ismahl is the sole survivor of the white whale's wrath. Both learn a similar lesson. They have assumptions about the profession they suddenly find themselves in that are shattered by the end of the story. They both also see the downfall of the captain they respect, watching as both men are driven mad with revenge. The history of whaling is a long and brutal one, and the Sea Beast explores that through analogy. Though sometimes the crew of the Inevitable outright use whaling tactics. When detailing the plan to catch and dispatch Red, Crow refers to a sleigh ride. This is a detail that goes back to actual whaling techniques in the 1800s, and what was known as a Nantucket sleigh ride. Nantucket was a major hub for whaling vessels. It was used as a port for ships to leave and then return carrying literal tons of dead whale bits. When hunting whales, these ships used to harpoon the poor animals. The whale would then naturally try to escape, but it would end up pulling the massive wooden ships along like a ghoulish dog sled. This is exactly what happens when the Inevitable engages Red and manages to land harpoons in her back. Red's a much better match for her pursuers and creates a large whirlpool that threatens to pull the ship under. Hey, remember how I mentioned imagery taken from Pirates of the Caribbean? It's hard not to make a movie about sailing ships these days without referencing the only successful films about pirates. Sorry, but nobody is paying homage to Cutthroat Island.
It took your balls.
When Red is pulling the Inevitable under by creating a large whirlpool, the crew finds themselves suddenly navigating world on its side. Crow is climbing the mast with his weapon, and the dashing Jacob is swinging around helping his fellow sailors. It's entirely evocative from the climactic battle in the grand finale of the Pirates trilogy. Don't we all wish it stayed a finale? In that film, the goddess Calypso creates the whirlpool to aid one side in a massive battle. Similar combat is had amongst the nearly capsized ships. This isn't the only visual similarity to pirates. I've already mentioned the tentacled Brickleback, but another monster shares features with the pirate's Kraken. The giant crab monster that attacks Jacob and Maisie is a nasty crustacean with an even nastier mouth. Its large maw is a circular sphincter surrounded by large hook teeth. The Kraken shares this same mouth, though much larger. If you want to go further, both seem to have taken it from the horrible worms that eat Gollum in Peter Jackson's King Kong. Just when I got that nightmare out of my head too. How about a few more movie references before we move on? This one is a quick one, but when Jacob meets Maisie's new blue blob of cuteness, he references a classic horror film. He refers to the creature possibly laying eggs in Maisie's mouth and having its offspring burst out of her chest. He's thinking of the xenomorphs from the Alien franchise. Heck, maybe even had an encounter with Star Trek's new version of the Gorn. Either way, yikes, man. Maybe that's how Sarah lost her leg. After surviving both the Red Bluster and Captain Crow, Maisie and Jacob find themselves on a strange tropical island. They soon find that they aren't the only inhabitants, as the tropical paradise is full of strange creatures. The idea of a monster-filled island extends far back in popular culture. Of course, there is the actual monster island of the Toho Godzilla series. It's represented here by footage of Skull Island from the legendary Monsterverse because of Toho's eagle-like gaze when it comes to using proper Godzilla footage. Here, fellow G-fans, let's try to wipe the taste from our mouths by looking at this quick still from Godzilla vs. Destroya. Crap. Anyway. Well, we can use the Monsterverse properly now because this island and the events that happen on and near it are similar to the classic tale of a monkey and his actress waifu. The island is where Red and Maisie's relationship is cemented. They learn a way of communicating that's similar to Darrow and Kong. Both giants also save their human companions from a ravenous beastie that they fight in an epic 1v1. It's a giant crab as opposed to whatever a V-Rex is, but it still involves Maisie being thrown around between two clashing titans. The sea beast also features a certain aesthetic describable as pirate punk. While the Pirates of the Caribbean certainly popularized it, there have been other examples that hold just as much influence on the new animated film. Bilgewater is a setting in the universe of League of Legends, and it bears a striking resemblance to Muckish Island. Both are havens for criminals and ne'er-do-wells. Both are filled with mysterious witches making one-sided bargains. Maybe Sea Beast 2 will add a pair of adorable bounty-hunting boyfriends. Let's take a closer look at the voices behind the characters in the Sea Beast. The biggest and most obvious star is Karl Urban as Jacob. Urban is best known for live-action roles like Star Trek and The Boys, but he's been lending his voice to animation more and more. He's also playing one of the leads in the upcoming animated adaptation of Ark Survival Evolved, so I look forward to him fighting some dinosaurs soon. The other side of this adorable pair is Maisie, played by relative newcomer Zaris-Angel Hator. Zaris is an English actor who has appeared in smaller parts before this film. Her first major role was in the British TV movie The Midnight Gang. Since then, she has made her way across the pond for her first role in a major US movie. Unfortunately for her, it was meme darling and two-time box office flop Morbius. Her time around the good Dr. Michael Morbius didn't end up hurting her career, however. Now that The Sea Beast has been released, she has something a little better on her resume than this.
Spend, have sex, excess.
She's also playing a major role in the upcoming television adaptation of Naomi Alderman's bestseller, The Power. Let's talk about one of the most obvious parallels. The Sea Beast shares a lot in common with the DreamWorks hit, How to Train Your Dragon. Both feature a lead who is caught up in a world of hunters and the beasts they fight. Both make friends with an adorable wide-mouthed creature. Both have the protagonist and beast team up to overthrow the old way of living. It feels like Sea Beast is even primed for a How to Train Your Dragon-like expansion. Sequels and television spin-offs could even be welcome with how much world building that has been established in just one film. So the true villains of the story are the haughty and snobby king and queen. This pair have been funding the hunts. We learn that their ancestry started the war between sea monsters and humans, and they have greatly profited from it. This pair is based on some real-life monarchs. The king deeply resembles King George III, who was the leader of England during the American Revolution. George was known as a failed monarch who saw the British Empire begin to fracture. He went insane with disease in his old age, and when he died, he left the crown to his son, who was even worse of a monarch. The other side of this pair is the queen, who seems to be the actual power behind the throne. She is constantly the one speaking and making demands while her husband remains uninvolved. The decision to commission the Imperador and disband the Hunters is clearly hers, though it may have more to do with how handsome Admiral Hornigold is. He is played by Dan Stevens after all. Her inspiration seems to stem from Queen Elizabeth of Gloriana, one of the most famous monarchs in history. She ruled England from 1558 to 1603. Like her real-life inspiration, this queen also wears red wigs and has a white painted face. Unlike her real-life counterpart, it looks like this queen's reign will end more abruptly. While this is not a Disney film, it has a lot of connections to another animated tale from the same director. The Sea Beast was directed by Chris Williams, who has had a long career with Disney. He was a co-director on Big Hero 6 and has contributed to stories for Moana and Frozen. He even provided the delightful voice of Oaken.
Woohoo! Hi, family!
However, he pays homage to Moana more with this tale. Both feature a young girl adrift on the ocean with a rather jaded older man, though I guess that technically describes Waterworld too. However, both films also feature our heroine being accosted by a giant crab near the midpoint of the film. Too bad this one wasn't voiced by a member of Flight of the Conchords. The Sea Beast was a surprising and delightful adventure that wasn't afraid to get a little scary. It also had a very real message about historical propaganda and how the elite lie to the people. There is a lot of wonderful world building, and hopefully it's successful enough to warrant a sequel. If we're really lucky, it'll be about Sarah Sharp.